Good afternoon, New York, and the rest of our listeners around the globe. My name is June Stoyer, and I'm the host of the Discerning View radio show, which is a special series focused on the Catholic faith. Our podcasts are available on iTunes under the Organic View Radio Network, or you can simply visit our on-demand section at www.theorganicview.com to listen to previous segments. If you have any questions, we'd love to hear from you, so please email us at questions@theorganicview.com. Today's show is sponsored by coronatools.com, the nation's leader in garden and landscaping tools. Listeners of the Organic View can receive 20% off their coronatools.com purchase by using the coupon code ORGVIEW. That's ORGVIEW. For more promotional offers, please visit our website at www.theorganicview.com. And don't forget to check out our contest section. Since publishing his memoir, 5 Years in Heaven, John Schlimm has received quite a response from readers around the world as they relate to his journey of faith, as well as his very special friendship with an 87-year-old Benedictine nun named Sister Augustine. On today's show, John is going to talk about how his journey of faith has evolved since the book was published. So I'd like to welcome back to the show John Schlimm. Good afternoon, John, and welcome back. Oh, my God.
Hey, June. It is so good to be back with you. I always love chatting with you and all of your listeners.
You are a very accomplished author, and even though we're not going to talk about all the different cookbooks that you've written, I just want to let our listeners who are not familiar with your work to let you know that your books are really the go-tos as far as eating healthy, and also all the books that you've written about incorporating alcohol into your meal. I mean, you were kind of like the plant-based party guy for the most part.
Well, I come from one of the oldest brewing families in the country, so it sort of courses through my veins, and it made sense. So I've had a lot of fun mixing that heritage in with healthy foods, and certainly people can check out those books at my website, johnschlimm.com, and hopefully have fun with them. The goal, no matter what the book is, whether it's 5 Years in Heaven or a cookbook, is always to tell a good story and take my readers on a really fun journey.
Thank you, and it definitely has been fun for me. In regards to 5 Years in Heaven, I can't believe it's been a couple of years since the book was published. Can you talk a little bit about how you met Sister Augustine? What drew you to her?
Yeah, it's been incredible to go through these last few years since the book has come out, because, so often these days books have such a short shelf life. They're there on the shelf 1 week and gone the next. But 5 Years in Heaven, thanks to all the great readers out there, has just kept chugging along. Really, it warms my heart to know how inspired people are by reading about my friendship with Sister Augustine. I met her when I was 31 years old, and she was 87. She was a nun here in my hometown of St. Mary's, Pennsylvania, at St. Joseph Monastery, which at the time was the oldest Benedictine convent in the country. And I had never even known that the ceramic shop that she had founded was even on the grounds of the convent. I went to school right next to the convent, so I spent a lot of time there. But we're led to where we're supposed to be when we're supposed to be led to these places. And when I was 31, it was a moment in my life that I'm sure a lot of your listeners can relate to, when you start having questions about your life journey and your faith, and wondering, did I make the right decisions? And on a really a rather random day to me, a friend actually suggested that we go to the ceramic shop at the convent. And I questioned if he even knew what he was talking about, because I'd never heard of a ceramic shop there. But sure enough, we went, and I still remember it was February 21st. I have that date circled with a little star on my calendar every year. And there was a blizzard out, but we went across town, went to the convent, and sure enough, there was the ceramic shop. And that's when I met her. And that began what was a 5-year friendship that changed my life. I would visit her a couple times a week. and no topic was off limits. We had great discussions, and she really just imparted such wisdom and knowledge to me that, I still embrace on a daily basis. Well, there weren't any particular prayers in particular that she shared with me. I mean, she certainly went to morning prayers and afternoon prayers and night prayers at the convent, and so that had an impression on me, just to see how much emphasis and the beautiful relationship she had to prayer. But in a way, our visits were very unique, almost prayer in and of themselves. But she was certainly, dedicated to Saint Benedict. She had a Benedictine medal on the kiln in her ceramic studio. She loved Saint Francis, who I know you love as well, and who I love. In fact, she would often refer to him by his first name, Francis, which I always got a kick out of. And I thought, well, if anyone can call a saint by their first name, it's certainly someone like Sister Augustine. And so it was just the little things like that really had an impact on me. She certainly led by example, and I tried to absorb as much of that example as I could in the short amount of time that we had together.
I know that you've received so many responses globally. Can you just share some of the responses that stand out, how your book has impacted other people?
Absolutely. And what has been really incredible to me, and something I did not expect when I wrote the book, was the varied responses and reactions that I would get. So, for example, I've heard from countless parents across the country who have children of different ages, from young into adulthood, who are battling drug abuse, which, knock on wood, is not something I've ever confronted, and it's not something that is written about in the book. But they, again and again, these parents have reached out to me to say the lessons they learned from Sister Augustine in 5 Years in Heaven have helped them to deal with their children and the drug abuse that they're in the throes of right now. And I just find that so fascinating and such a blessing that a story like 5 Years in Heaven can translate into so many different topics, and especially, in this day and age when opioid abuse and other drug issues is such a problem. So that has just really warmed my heart to know that in some small way, 5 Years in Heaven is helping those people. I also, another standout response that I got was from a grandma in Iowa, and she wrote and she told me how her 6-year-old grandson had passed away from cancer, and how 5 Years in Heaven had helped her as well as her daughter, the child's mother, cope with that just unbelievable loss. And she actually sent 2 copies of the book for me to sign, and she asked if I would draw a hummingbird in her daughter's copy, because that was a special sign between her daughter and her daughter's 6-year-old son. And she asked if I would draw a butterfly in her copy, because that was a special sign for her. I had never drawn a hummingbird or a butterfly before, but they usually draw little guardian angels when I'm doing book signings in the books. But Sister Augustine was such a great artist and loved birds especially, as well as all animals. I said, you better guide my hand in doing this hummingbird and butterfly. Those have been really great responses. But I also, the one-on-ones have been incredible. Like, people come up to me in the street or at the supermarket or when I'm traveling around the country. And I had, of all places, I had one young man come up to me. It was about 1 a.m. We were at a bar. I didn't know who he was. When you're from an old beer family, sometimes you find yourself in a bar on a weekend. Yeah. And he came up to me and he leaned in and he said, I read your memoir, and he said, it taught me how to forgive. And wow. I don't know who he is. He said that. He said, thank you. And he just disappeared back into the crowd. I wish I knew who he was, but I'm so glad that the book touched him in that way. And again and again, that's been one of the biggest reactions, is the forgiveness. That's the subject of a chapter in the book where Sister and I, I'm helping Sister roll out some of her clay for these crosses she would make from leftover clay because she wasted nothing. And I asked her, I got up the courage to look at her and say, "Sister, what's the biggest lesson you've learned in your life?" And she thought for a moment, and she looked at me and then said a single word: forgiveness. And that moment turned into a really beautiful discussion that we had about the power of forgiveness. And that is definitely one of those lessons that every day I'm doing my best to put into practice, because, we all have someone who, we need to forgive, or perhaps someone whose forgiveness we need to seek. So such a powerful lesson.
Especially with divine mercy, the whole message of divine mercy, how great God's mercy is. It doesn't matter what you've done, God will forgive you if you seek forgiveness from him. And proof of that, I tend to refer to St. Paul because of his conversion, how many Christians he slaughtered, and he took joy in doing it. His conversion to do a complete 180 was just remarkable, and God forgave him. And I think to myself, well, it doesn't matter what I've done, God will forgive me. And you look at so many of the saints before us that have been forgiven. So having Sister Augustine talk about the message of forgiveness, a lot of people still don't understand the importance of forgiveness. They don't understand even how it impacts them. And I remember going to a seminar, and the speaker was saying, when you hold on to something, it's kind of like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die from it. And
yes,
it's very true. So, your message of forgiveness, I think, is so incredibly important, especially in today's world.
Absolutely. And, if there's just one chapter out of the entire book that I would encourage people to read, it would be that chapter, which is chapter 6, and it's titled Tiny Crosses, because it is the single chapter that I have heard the most about. It has, I've heard, people have interacted and reacted to all the chapters in the book, but it's that chapter 6 that time and again people have written to me about and spoke to me about. And even, when I've done media interviews, the reporters are, fixated on that one chapter because it's had such a profound effect, which has been really great to see. I love that. But what has also been really interesting is the reaction internationally. China is embracing this book with just, I want to do backflips with excitement because I just think it's so cool that, Sister's message, and I can just see her with that little smile she would always have and that twinkle in her eye, just kind of smiling down to see where her message is actually getting to. But in China, they have now gone through several reprints of the book. They've done several editions of the book. It's come out in various paperback editions and an ebook edition. And just this year, they released a hardcover illustrated edition of the book. And that's just so fantastic. And I think it's really cool. And now I'm starting to get, over social media, which connects all of us in many ways, messages that will come from people either in China or elsewhere in the world who are reading this book.
I know for myself, when I went to China, there are so many things that people pay attention to that we don't as a society here in America, and one of them happens to be signs. And you've alluded to different signs throughout this conversation, for example, with the tiny crosses, and I think that's something that really does resonate with the Chinese people. It's a very big deal to them. When you look at your own journey, when I look at my own journey, I look back and I see all the different signs that I probably wouldn't have paid attention to, but it does draw us to look at something called divine providence. Could you talk about some of the signs, now that the book has been published for a couple of years, you can look back and see the signs that were there?
Well, the book itself exists because of a very special sign that I was sent. shortly after Sister Augustine passed away, my agent said, you really need to sit down and write a memoir about your friendship. And I said, it was such a personal time, those 5 years, that I think this may be the one book I will never be able to write. Especially, there's a responsibility that comes when you're telling a story for not only yourself, but also another person. And so he kept after me year after year as I was working on other book projects. And finally, I just sort of looked up in the sky and I said, all right, sister, I need you to please send me a very specific sign that only you and I will ever know. And if I get that sign, I'll know that I have your blessing to share our story with the world. And if I don't get that sign, I will be at complete peace with that, knowing that every day I'm putting the lessons you taught me to work in my daily life. And thus, the ripples of your lessons are going out that way. So I put that out to her, and then I just went back to working on my other book projects. And a couple years after that, on a random Thursday afternoon, an afternoon just like I would have been when I would have been in her studio visiting with her, the sign came out of nowhere. And I picked up my phone, I called my agent, and I said, I'll be sitting down tomorrow to start the memoir. I sat down the next morning. In 4 weeks, the first draft was done. And 2 months later, it was sold at auction, actually, among several different editors. And it landed on the desk of an editor who had worked with, Pope Francis and Pope Benedictine, and I had just put it all in Sister's hands. And she certainly aimed high because it landed on the right desk. But the book itself happened because of that very special sign, which, of course, everyone wants to know what that sign was. And, true to my promise, that's the one thing that's going to just forever be between me and Sister. But on a weekly basis, people will ask if I still feel connected to her after all of these years. And I tell them I feel more connected to her now than I did even when, I was visiting her every week. And, almost on a weekly basis, I get all sorts of signs from her. It could be wind chimes, because there was a set of wind chimes I had given to her for the first birthday that I was friends with her, and they hung just outside her studio. And when I would arrive or leave, I'd swipe my hand across them. So I hear wind chimes, forget-me-nots, which were, one of her famous motifs that she put on a lot of things. I'll see forget-me-nots, and in just so many other ways, she has, answered prayers that I have entrusted to her. And so we have a really great relationship. But yes, there's a power in those signs. And I think that I'm sure a lot of your listeners can relate to that. And if nothing else, they make us become more aware of this fantastic world around us.
Well, I think signs are definitely unique to us and to the relationship that we had with that particular person. I know for myself, ladybugs are significant to me in regards to a very dear friend of mine, Anthony Fawina, who was healed by Padre Pio, and his story is world-renowned. He actually testified at the Vatican about his healing, and Anthony went home to God in the fall of last year. I actually just saw Ladybug the other day. I know he's watching over, and I know he's praying hard. So many people have shared similar stories about different people that they loved that have also gone home to God, and the signs definitely are there. It's just, are you paying attention? And sometimes we do, sometimes we don't. I remember when Anthony first died, I went to something called the Catholic Underground, which is in New York City. It's the first Saturday of the month, and I was there with my friend Carmine. We both actually did the same thing. We both said to Anthony, let us know if you made it. We knew he made it, but we just, wanted a sign. So lo and behold, I didn't really give much thought to it, but I had to run some errands that weekend, and then Monday morning when I was at daily mass, I looked at the chair that he used to sit in. Before he died, he was in a tremendous amount of pain, and he could barely walk, so he would sit in the front row. and I looked at the seat that he would occupy, and I said, Anthony, don't forget about me. And then all of a sudden I started thinking about the events of the day before, and at some point I went to a Dollar Tree, I think it was, and they had these Halloween costumes, and lo and behold, it was the first aisle that I walked down, and there were ladybug Halloween costumes that were right on the left-hand side, and I didn't really pay any attention to it. And then I'm thinking to myself, okay, when am I going to see ladybugs? And then it dawned on me that was my ladybug. So I knew Anthony was home.
Absolutely. Well, I grew up in a very Catholic family, and so from an early age, I remember my mother praying to St. Teresa with various intentions, and of course the sign from St. Teresa is a rose, and almost in every instance, my mother would receive in some form or another a rose, and so that always had an impression on me. And of course, she always prayed to St. Joseph when something was lost. Or not St. Yes.
St. Anthony.
St. Anthony. St. Anthony. You can pray to St. Joseph too, I suppose. Absolutely. But St. Anthony, she would pray to him when something was lost, and sure enough, it would be found, which is something I certainly do. In fact, I sometimes I fear I've gotten a little cocky because sometimes I'll give St. Anthony a time frame. I'll say, okay, I need you to please find this in the next 5 minutes or 2 minutes or 1 hour. And do you know, he has yet to let me down on that. He always comes through in the time frame that I've given to him. One of these times he might not, but so far so good. But it's really amazing what happens when you open yourself up to receiving these beautiful signs and just to that relationship with the saints and to those who have passed on, who were very, very special to us. I have what I call my heavenly board of directors, which is, at this point, just dozens and dozens of loved ones who have passed on, as well as favorite saints, like my Saint John Evangelist, who I'm named after, as well as the guardian angels and so many others. And they really are sort of that collection who I pray to, and they're very overworked. I put them through, they do a lot of work on my behalf, but it's so nice to know that they're there.
Oh, I couldn't agree more. The saints were basically sinners who went the distance, and they're people just like us who made it. And so they get it. They understand what we deal with. They understand the things that trouble us. And they can really identify with how the world works, especially in this modern day and age. And now you have Sister Augustine, who's up there watching over you, and I'm sure you must view her as a saint. Aren't we all called to be saints?
Absolutely. And, she was such a great lover of animals, just like I am and like you are. And so I've come, on the one hand, to think of her as a patron saint of animals, especially rescue animals, because I do a lot of work with rescue dogs in particular. And every once in a while, there's an instance where I will entrust one of my little furry friends to her care and ask that she intercede and help them. And again, she's come through every time. And I know that readers of 5 Years in Heaven who have reached out to me tell me about how they will entrust certain prayers and intentions to her now as well. So that just brings a smile to my face when I think that she is now serving as an ongoing inspiration to folks and someone who they can turn to for comfort with their own struggles, whatever those struggles may be.
John, is there any possibility that this story will be made into either a documentary or even a movie?
Well, from your lips to God's ears, that is something that would be really fantastic. And I just, that's once I wrote the book and put it out into the world, I literally turned it over to Sister Augustine, and I told her to, it's up to you now to take the book wherever you feel it needs to go. And so if it ends up on the big screen or the small screen, whatever that might be, that would be really fantastic. And I think that, it has had such a tremendous ongoing life during the last couple of years that it's been out, and it's always exciting to see where it's going to go next. So, we'll send that little prayer up to her and a little request and see what happens.
Well, if you think about it, I think society is changing in the sense that a lot of the stuff that Hollywood has been putting out, all the gore, all the hardcore stuff, the very, very strong subjects that they are pushing, I think people are tired of it. I think they're disgusted with it, and they want something that's more wholesome, is more uplifting, and also something that's going to stay with them. A story like this is just that, and I could see why the people in China would embrace something like 5 Years in Heaven. And John, I can't tell you how exciting it is that you're in China. That is so amazing beyond words. Just the fact that you're going to reach so many people that have faith, that have been prevented from really sharing their faith, and now you have the opportunity to do something so wonderful. So I'm sure Sister Augustine must be smiling.
I really hope that she is smiling, and I have no doubt. I mean, she certainly was someone who smiled a lot here, and I think that she has to be smiling up there as well. I once asked her if she was afraid of dying, because she had told me how many of her siblings had passed away very suddenly, and some of them tragically. And when I said, "Are you afraid of dying?" which I write about in the book, she just smiled and said, "No, everyone's entitled to their reward." And I thought that was so beautiful. And so when she finally did pass away, I really didn't feel sadness. What I thought was, you have your reward now. Of course, that didn't mean her job was done. She is continuing to work on behalf of all of us, and that's just so exciting. And, and back to your point about the movie, when I was writing the book, I wrote it very much from a visual perspective, because she was such a phenomenal artist. And that's another thing that's been really great, to see how her art, her ceramics have continued to inspire people out there. In fact, there was a teacher, when you talk about the influence she has had, there's a high school teacher who taught his art students about her, and then they did bowls, because she was very famous for this series of bowls called her Gussie Specials, which were beautiful abstract bowls, which I know you're going to be posting some pictures of with this interview. And he showed the pictures of the bowls to his students, and then they did their own collection of these bowls, which were then sold at the local art gallery. And hundreds of these bowls went out the door in about 20 minutes. Because people who had read this story and then saw how these students had been inspired by Sister Augustine, public school students, by the way, which I thought was just really awesome. They just flocked to get these bowls. And so that was really cool to watch as well. And especially see how inspired these students were, by this nun that they had only ever heard about, and just seeing pictures of her work. So, the influence continues, and I'm game to go along for the journey wherever that leads.
John, from what I understand, you have a special promotion that's running on these books in order to share the message of your journey with Sister Augustine. Could you share that with our listeners?
Absolutely. Recently, this huge website called BookBub, bookbub.com, they were so inspired by the book that they decided to do a very special promotion with the ebook version. So for all the ebook readers out there, and I know there are a lot, through April 22nd, they have dramatically reduced the price of the ebook to $1.99, because they really wanted to ensure that the book got into as many hands as possible, and that as many people as possible could embrace the inspiration in 5 Years in Heaven. So I'm so appreciative of them doing that, and it's just one more of the gifts that has come along in this journey of people continuing to embrace this book and wanting to share it with the world. So I encourage anyone out there who hasn't read it yet and they have an e-reader to please go to BookBub and take advantage of that really great promotion and just enjoy the book.
Thank you. John, I just want to say thank you so much for being on the show. It has been a pleasure talking about the progress that you've made with this book, as well as your own journey of faith, which continues to develop and go in so many different directions. Sister Augustine must be so proud of you. I know she's smiling.
Oh, well, I'm smiling back at her. It was definitely a beautiful friendship that continues.
Folks, please check out the companion article, which will feature some of the pictures of Sister Augustine's artwork, which is just absolutely breathtaking. Her work was just truly wonderful, and John is fortunate enough to own some of these pieces. You can check out the companion article at theorganicview.com. Thank you so much for tuning in. This has been June Stoyer with the Discerning View radio show. Have a great afternoon.